The file begins. The breach wasn't a whisper. It was the crack of a bone in a silent room. Pause. 3 employees at the London clinic, their digital fingers sticky with ambition, had torn open a file that was never meant for them. The violation was absolute. It wasn't just data. It was the theft of dignity, a digital autopsy performed on a living subject. The internet's gutters overflowed with speculation, each theory more grotesque than the last. The institution, built on centuries of protocol, found itself paralyzed. Its silence was not golden. It was the cold, heavy silence of a tomb. The public demanded truth, but what they craved was a spectacle. Pause. Catherine was no longer a person. She was a puzzle, a conspiracy, a commodity of clicks and whispers. This was the first nail in the coffin of her privacy. Further down, the path only gets darker. The transition into 2025 was not marked by calendars. It was marked by treatment cycles. The public, still buzzing from the breach, demanded proof of life, a photograph, a wave from a balcony, anything. They mistook silence for secrecy, recovery for conspiracy. Inside the gilded cage, a different war was being waged. A war fought in sterile rooms against an enemy that doesn't negotiate. This was the anatomy of isolation, the profound loneliness of a public figure forced into a battle that is universally private. Her smile, once a national asset, became a piece of strategic armor. Heavy, cold. Every public statement was a carefully weighed transaction, trading a sliver of information for a moment of peace. But the peace never lasted. The public's curiosity was a debt that could never be repaid. The monarchy needed a symbol. The children needed a mother. Pause. She just needed to survive. This was not the first time she had to fight for survival. The earlier battle was simply for a different kind of existence. Before the diagnosis, before the palace, there was the climb. An inventory of her early life reveals not a fairy tale, but a meticulously executed plan. The girl from Berkshire was a project in perfection. Her meeting with the future king at St. Andrews was not a coincidence. It was a casting call. That infamous see-through dress was not a youthful misstep. It was a closing argument, and it was devastatingly effective. The public's initial fascination was a form of coronation. They projected a fantasy onto her, and in return, she surrendered her anonymity. This was the first fatal transaction. Her integration into the firm was an exercise in erasure. Old friends were archived. Personal ambitions shelved. The early years were a quiet, brutal re-education in the art of being seen and not known. The tabloids called her Weighty Katie, a cruel, simple brand. Pause. It was her first lesson in the conditional nature of public adoration. The first invoice for a life that was not yet hers. The wedding was the verdict. She was sentenced to a life of unimaginable privilege and unbearable scrutiny. Her role was now codified. The production of heirs, the maintenance of an image, the performance of duty. Her body was no longer her own. It was a vessel for the bloodline. Her face, a mask of serene composure for the nation. Every outfit was a uniform. Every smile, a carefully calibrated statement. Her charity work, a masterclass in strategic empathy. The focus on early childhood was not a whim. It was the perfect, unimpeachable territory, a walled garden of purpose within the gilded fortress. It was her project, her contribution. Pause, her alibi. A proof of life for the woman trapped inside the princess. The personal sacrifices were not grand or dramatic. They were a death by 1,000 paper cuts. The inability to be sad in public, the loss of spontaneous joy, the slow, methodical sanding down of a personality until it was smooth, elegant, and offered no resistance. This is the anatomy of her reign. A quiet, ongoing tension between the woman she was and the symbol she was forced to become. The script required perfection. A single missed line could destabilize an empire. And then the empire script was breached. The first intrusion was not a thunderclap. It was a whisper in the server room of Pause the London Clinic, a sanctuary for the powerful now turned into a digital crime scene. The fortress of her privacy was not stormed by foreign agents or elite hackers. It was betrayed from within. An inventory of sins committed by the mundane. At least one staff member, perhaps more, saw a patient file not as a sacred trust, but as a key to a vault. The motive was as old and as grubby as sin itself. Pause. Greed. The method was insultingly simple. An abuse of legitimate access. No sophisticated code. Just a cursor clicking on a name that promised a headline. The initial investigation was a frantic, quiet affair. A desperate attempt to plug a hole in a dam that had already burst. The Information Commissioner's office was notified. A statement was prepared. But the damage was not the data itself. It was the violation. The knowledge that a stranger had rifled through the clinical, intimate details of her suffering. Her body, once again, was not her own. It was a commodity. A subject of illicit curiosity traded in the shadowy back alleys of the internet. The legal machine ground into motion. It was not a quest for justice. It was an exercise in containment, a posthumous audit of her stolen privacy. Lawsuits were a double-edged sword. To prosecute publicly was to risk testifying, to place the very information they sought to protect into the public record, a paradox wrapped in ermine and legalese. The palace's strategy was surgical, silent. They sought not a public hanging, but a quiet amputation. The identified staff were dismissed, their careers terminated. But prosecuting the act itself was a walk through a hall of mirrors. The challenge was not proving the breach, but linking the digital fingerprints to a specific individual beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. It was a slow, expensive war of attrition fought by men in 1,000-pound suits. The true sentence was not handed down by a judge. It was served by Pause Catherine. A life sentence of knowing. Knowing that the walls had ears. That the chart by the bed, the scan in the machine, the notes typed by a trusted professional, all were just potential exhibits. Pause. The privacy was never truly recovered. It was merely a ghost haunting the wreckage of an empire's trust. The hunt for this ghost began not in the press, but in the server rooms. The palace does not use the police for such matters. It uses men who carry burner phones and bill by the hour. An inventory of sins was commissioned. The digital autopsy revealed the breach was not a single violent smash and grab. It was a quiet, creeping sickness. A series of small, unauthorized entries. A nurse on a night shift. An administrator with overdue bills. The log showed search queries, clinical terms, prognoses, timelines, the kind of cold hard data that translates into a headline and a paycheck. The evidence wasn't a grainy photo, it was colder, a timestamp. 3:17 a.m., a user, ID, a click. The true horror was in its banality. The motivation was not statecraft, but simple, ugly human curiosity mixed with greed. A digital, peeping Tom looking into the soul of a future queen. And the final report, bound in black leather, and placed on a mahogany desk in Windsor, contained the most chilling finding. Data wasn't just viewed. Pause, it was copied. A file now untethered. A ghost released from its machine, waiting for the right price to materialize in the tabloids of London, New York, or Sydney. The war was no longer about containment. It was about waiting for the explosion. The explosion never came, but the silence that followed was heavier than any headline. This is the anatomy of the new Catherine. The public saw a curated return in 2026. A woman in pastels, smiling from a carriage. The dossier, however, records the diagnosis of a second, incurable condition, hypervigilance. A life sentence of scanning faces in a crowd, of seeing a potential threat in every outstretched hand holding a phone. Her retreat into art therapy and nature was not a hobby. It was a prescription, a strategic withdrawal from a world of people into a world of things that could not betray her. Trees do not sell secrets. Clay does not leak to the press. The illness was an invasion of the body. The breach was an invasion of the soul. One could be fought with medicine. The other had no cure. It created an invisible perimeter around her, a moat of suspicion that even family could not fully cross. Pause. The gilded cage had become a high-security bunker. The long-term toll is not measured in hospital visits, but in lost trust, a fundamental alteration of her perception of the world. Every smile is now a calculation. Every public appearance a masterpiece of control. The cancer may recede, but the knowledge of what was stolen and the permanent fear of its reappearance is a shadow that will follow her to the throne. Pause. A ghost forever sitting beside her. This unwilling legacy of vulnerability became her coronation. The public had been sold a flawless product for years. A princess of porcelain, perfect for postcards and commemorative plates. That product was recalled. In its place stood something far more potent, a fractured icon. The monarchy, an institution built on the cold granite of mystique, suddenly had a leader whose power came from the warmth of a shared wound. This was not a calculated rebranding. It was an accident, a glorious, terrible accident that accomplished what 1,000 orchestrated photo ops never could. It made her real. Her exhaustion in 2025 and 2026 was not a sign of weakness. It was a testament of survival. People do not connect with perfection. They connect with the struggle to reclaim it. The firm lost control of the narrative, and in doing so, pause. Catherine captured something far more valuable than approval. She captured empathy. The old image, polished and distant, was a liability in an age of authenticity. The new one, scarred and human, became a shield. Her pain inoculated her against trivial criticism. An attack on her felt like an attack on a sister, a daughter, a wife. The paradox is brutal. To become truly powerful, she had to be publicly broken. Her strength is no longer in her smile. It is in the visible effort behind it. The final audit reveals a bitter truth. The institution learned lessons in damage control, not in humanity. The crisis of 2025 was logged not as a human tragedy, but as a systems failure. The solution was an upgrade to the firewall, a tightening of protocols, a reinforcement of the bunker's walls. The machine was serviced. The soul of the operator was not. This is the bitter testament of modern royalty, a gilded contract where the price of the palace is the deed to your inner life. Pause. Catherine's ordeal did not rewrite the contract. It simply added a new, more terrifying clause in microscopic print. The media is not the enemy. It is the ecosystem, a predator that the monarchy must feed to maintain the unnatural balance, and the public, with its endless appetite for content, is the engine that drives the hunt. The true heavy burden of the crown is no longer its physical weight. It is the crushing weight of digital surveillance. The knowledge that every moment, from triumph to tragedy, is raw material for the great content machine. The verdict is not for Catherine. It is for the throne she will one day inherit. It is a magnificent historical prison. The lesson was not that privacy is a right. The lesson was that, for them, it is a commodity that has already been sold.